Now, in this edition of Let's Talk Some Star Wars, we'll be taking a look at the results of the poll that asked the question, what rating would you give Season 1 of The Mandalorian? As usual then, I'll also be reading and responding to some comments, as well as showing off some of the artwork and other images that were sent in to me. And let's just right away get to the results, where we'll see that 61% of the 59,000 voters said the show was amazing and gave it 5 stars, while another 31% gave it 4 stars and thought it was very good. 6% of voters thought it was average and gave it 3 stars, which then left 1% to give it 2 stars, and a final 1% to give it just 1 star. And all this then means that 92% of voters thought the show was above average, and only 2% thought it was below, while 6% fell directly in the middle. And when we do the math here, it means the first season of The Mandalorian receives a score of 4.5 stars. And all things considered, I think the big takeaways from this poll are pretty obvious, that a vast majority of fans really enjoy the show, and that this notion that the fanbase is just full of haters is completely false. Furthermore, no, it's not impossible to please almost all Star Wars fans. They will recognize and happily enjoy something when it's good, even here in the Disney era. This idea that we're the worst, most pickiest of fan bases who only want stories that go exactly the way we want them to go is really blown out of the water by these results. In fact, a great many comments from this week's poll talk about how much they love the show, even though it's not perfect, or what they were expecting or even hoping for. And speaking of those comments, let's now get to them. And though there were certainly plenty this time that just heaped praise on the show, and I will read some of those, I'll of course also be reading some that do criticize it to some extent, or bring up other issues or concerns, though again, most do just seem to love the show even if they do have some complaints. And so let's get started, as we always do, with the top-rated comment, which this week came to us from Sam Hill, who said, "This is the type of show you get when you have a team of writers, directors, producers that have a consistent vision and plan for the story, the exact opposite of what we got with the sequel trilogy. The Mandalorian is the best Star Wars Disney has put out, and nothing is even remotely close, well, maybe except for Rogue One." And you know, almost every doubt I may have had about the show was wiped away during Star Wars Celebration last April when I watched the Mandalorian panel. It was pretty much just Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau sitting down and geeking out over Star Wars and the show they were creating. And that love and excitement was clearly injected into the show itself and shines through in the end product. And from everything I've seen, you get nearly that same level of love and excitement from the cast and directors and the crew. And no surprise, it adds up to a show that, again, almost all fans just love. Okay, next up we have this comment from Devin Dykstra, who said, "Best thing to happen to Star Wars since Rogue One, maybe even Revenge of the Sith." And yes, I do agree with you and the first commenter, and many other people that say it is the best thing Star Wars since Rogue One, and maybe the best thing Disney Star Wars overall. But the best thing since Revenge of the Sith, that one I don't know about, because there was this little show called The Clone Wars in there as well, and though they're two rather different types of shows, despite both obviously being Star Wars, The Mandalorian has to prove itself in the long run before I'd say it's better than The Clone Wars. Others can of course feel differently, but as I've said many times before, the later seasons of The Clone Wars have some of the best Star Wars moments anywhere ever. That then brings us to this comment from Holy Heathen, who said, "So many good things to say about The Mandalorian. The feel of the show, Baby Yoda, Mando culture, Baby Yoda. However, the most important thing they did in my opinion is this. As a grown-ass man, I've only seen a handful of episodes of The Clone Wars and Rebels. Favreau and Filoni doing something this right makes me want to actually go watch more Star Wars. Something the sequel trilogy has failed to do. This is the way." And kind of going along with what I was just saying before, The Clone Wars, especially again those later seasons, are some of the best Star Wars you're ever going to see. And I can't recommend enough going back and watching all of it to you or anyone else who hasn't seen all of it or maybe any of it at all. Rebels 2 is a really good show, not as good as The Clone Wars overall, but it's certainly worth watching in my opinion, plus you'll learn more about the Darksaber. And speaking of that, I think it was brilliant for them to end the first season of The Mandalorian by revealing the Darksaber, because it does make people want to go back and watch other stuff related to it. No, you're not going to have to watch it in order to understand what's going on or what will happen in Season 2, because I'm sure Season 2 itself will do a good job of explaining just what it is and why it's important. But again, I think it's the perfect way to end the first season and to give some people, those who haven't seen those related shows before, something to do while they wait for the next season. They can now go watch Clone Wars and Rebels and learn more about the Darksaber. And even us fans who have seen it can go back and rewatch it all. Furthermore here, if I may go off on one of my little tangents, I do love that they were bold enough to put something in there that had been firmly established elsewhere in the canon, because I don't like this argument mainly made in regards to the movies that you can't or shouldn't use characters or items like the Darksaber that come from elsewhere. An example being that, let's say Ahsoka shouldn't show up in the sequels, primarily because most casual fans and average moviegoers would have no idea who she was. But the thing is, all you have to do is treat her or whoever else like a new character when they show up for those who don't know them. In other words, proceed as if no one knows who they are and you'll be just fine. And no, I'm not saying Ahsoka should have been in the sequel trilogy, though her voice is of course in there at the bitter end, but bringing in such characters to the movies shouldn't be an automatic no because some people don't know who they are. Okay, moving on now, we have this comment from Private BH who said, "It's amazing, 5 stars. People got complaints because they see some episodes as filler, but I see those episodes as character building and plot driving episodes. And some people think it's acted bad, but I think the actors portray characters in a galaxy filled with criminals and war well. I just feel like the show has the feel of classic, and it's an unbiased opinion. It also just feels like Star Wars." And look, I'll certainly say that some episodes of the show do feel like filler. Not saying they don't serve a purpose in the grand scheme of things, or that every single episode has to push the story forward in an immediately obvious, meaningful way. But I think one of the problems is a lot of the episodes are on the shorter side, just being over a half hour long usually. And it makes one ask or wonder if a tighter story for Season 1 could have and should have been crafted. But to counter myself a little bit there, this was in some respects a big experiment. This was our first ever live action Star Wars show, and it wasn't going to be perfect. And though I know Season 2 had already started filming by the time Season 1 was airing, I'd still imagine they'll take a look at some of the feedback they're getting, and they'll try to adjust, especially for future seasons and also future shows altogether. And though I'm super excited for Season 2, I'm almost more curious to see what the show will become down the road, when it really hits its stride, and what future Star Wars shows may end up looking like as well. Okay, let's now get to this comment from Ted Bradford who said, "For some reason I was led to believe that The Mandalorian was going to have a tone similar to Game of Thrones, dark, gritty, visually spectacular. And I think we got a little bit of all of those, but the overall tone was much more like the original trilogy than Game of Thrones, and I like it. It wasn't what I expected, but not in the same subversive, in-your-face, look how original I'm being kind of way. It owns its style and it delivers with the confidence of a show that has a plan and a story to tell over a handful of seasons. Respect. Baby Yoda is always cute, and that could have gone over terribly for fans expecting something darker. But it absolutely works. It's not perfect, but as a fan, I don't want perfect, I want sincere. And The Mandalorian feels incredibly sincere. Thank you, Jon Favreau, and thank you, Dave Filoni, for reminding us that good Star Wars material doesn't have to check all the boxes. It just has to be creative, engaging, imaginative, and fun. Very well said, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you called the show sincere. And that's what people truly love about it and why they'll be forgiving of any of these early flaws. This is an attempt, again by some very passionate Star Wars fans themselves, to make a show that other Star Wars fans will love and enjoy, while also trying to do something a bit more original here. Okay, moving on, we now have this comment from Tex Trek who said, "It was definitely a very well done Star Wars story. I'm one of those Star Wars fans that holds the sequel trilogy in utter contempt, as it's complete garbage. The Mandalorian is what Star Wars is meant to be. Now, if Disney would just put Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni in charge of Lucasfilm, then maybe we could get an actual sequel trilogy in theaters one of these days." And though I can't see them ever redoing the sequels, as I've said before, I do think Kathleen Kennedy will be out next year when her contract expires. And though I don't think Dave Filoni will be made president of Lucasfilm, I think someone like Jon Favreau is a better choice, just based off his overall experience with the industry. If Filoni is not the right-hand man of whoever is the next president, if he's not given some title like head of story development, I'd be both surprised and very disappointed. Okay, next here we have a comment from Hiccup22 who said, "I find the lack of story progression regarding Baby Yoda irritating. I'm getting lost vibes and I don't want to deal with that again, where they dangle the hook, in this case the Baby Yoda mystery, milk your viewership all season without satisfying payoff or even much progression in this case." Then we have this comment from Spooky Skeleton who said, "It was pretty good, but I kind of hope they tone down Baby Yoda, because I think it's going to cause a tone issue in the show with the Mandalorian being a badass and Baby Yoda being a baby. I just don't want it to become a distraction, like how in The Phantom Menace, you keep going back and forth between an awesome lightsaber fight to Jar Jar Binks." And I'm actually very curious to know if Disney and Lucasfilm thought Baby Yoda would end up being the huge hit with the fans that he ended up being, or if they were terrified people were going to reject him or hate him, or just the idea in general. Obviously, I think most of us will agree it ends up working and working very well, and we love Baby Yoda. But I really don't think he's the long-term game plan for the show. I think Baby Yoda's arc gets wrapped up next season. And I know when I suggested that in one of my reviews, some people thought I was crazy because he's one of the best parts of the show. But I do think the original idea or intent with the character is to simply humanize the Mandalorian. I mean, if they didn't want to make such a huge splash with the first episode, where he's of course revealed at the end, I think they would have been better off giving us a couple episodes of the Mandalorian being a bit more, shall we say, cold and careless. A true bounty hunter who doesn't care about anything but just getting the job done. Then you bring in Baby Yoda in like episode 3, and for the rest of the first season we see a gradual change in the Mandalorian. So again, I don't know that it was ever their intent to make Baby Yoda basically a co-star to the Mandalorian in the whole series. I think he was more of a tool to help our main character, one they hoped people would love and find adorable, sure, and that people would care about enough to see his story arc get fulfilled someday, but I think the grand vision of the show goes far beyond Baby Yoda. I could certainly be wrong, and I'm sure some of you out there hope I am. I guess only time will tell. Okay, let's get to just a few more comments now, starting with this one from Fireblaze, who said, "The Mandalorian was nearly everything I love about Star Wars. The story, the characters, the music, and most of all, the struggle to do the right thing. Not to mention all the lore and development we got on how life after the Empire was like. It revitalized Star Wars and really gives us a new hope." Then there's this comment from Donnie Biggerstaff who said, "It's a love letter to the original, the Star Wars we deserve." Then this comment from Dauberzilla who said, "The Mandalorian, Rogue One, Fallen Order, and the Vader comic proves that Disney can make great Star Wars stories." And finally, this comment from Alex Hayden who said, "If not for this show, I would feel pretty done with the future of Star Wars. I was on the edge and the Rise of Skywalker would have pushed me over. Now I have something to look forward to." And I think all these final few comments lead to a very interesting question, one that just so happens to be this week's poll question. How do you feel about the future of Star Wars now that the sequel trilogy is over and we're getting a show like The Mandalorian? There's also Season 7 of The Clone Wars right around the corner, the Obi-Wan series, the Cassian Andor series, and rumored other projects like a continuation of Rebels that will follow Sabine and Ahsoka during their hunt for Ezra. We also can't forget that roughly 3 years from now, a new series of films will start that supposedly will be set in the High Republic era, which is 400 years before the Skywalker saga took place. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to either go vote and comment on the new poll, a link to which will be found in the description below, or to tell me what you thought about Season 1 of The Mandalorian, or what I or anyone else had to say about it in this video. Either way, leave a comment somewhere and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.